All right, for the next talk, I'm going to reintroduce a previous speaker that spoke this morning. And this talk is actually split between two speakers. The first is Mrs. Catherine Souza, who spoke this morning. She will be speaking again. And the second is our very own Mother Prioress, or Mother Marie Sabina. Or Marie Sabina or Marie Sabina. Okay, I'll get it right. Is going to be speaking for the second half of the presentation. So thank you very much, and please welcome our speakers.
Thank you, and to the live stream people, I'm sorry you don't get to see my face this time because we lost the camera feed. But you know what I look like. You saw me this morning, so you just get to hear me. Maybe we'll find a cord here soon. Thank you, Ethan, Your Excellency, Reverend Fathers, dear sisters, fellow parishioners, and my family, if they still stayed around for part two, and those watching. It's an honor to once again speak at these presentations on Catholic tradition in the Northwest. I will now be relaying to you the early history of the Carmelite Order of Nuns within our parish and a little bit about their monastery located in the Spokane Valley and give some general information about their order. I am also dedicating this shorter talk in loving memory of my parents, John and Bernice O'Neill, and Leonard and Jewel Malloy, fellow parishioners and longtime family friends who have all since passed away. I give special thanks to the Carmelite Sisters, especially Sister Maria McTildy, who happens to be the sisters for Fathers James and Matthew Hanos, for putting together so much information and so many pictures, and for entrusting me with the presentation of their history here. A few of the pictures I will be going through fairly quickly, and I'm sorry there are some display boards in the back, but our time is split. So, Mother Marie Christiane, who was the sister to Archbishop Lefebvre, knew from her brother that many vocations to the Carmelites had been falling away because there was no Carmel in which the Tridentine Mass was offered. So she co-founded the Carmel of the Sacred Heart in Belgium in 1978, and the Carmel of the Holy Trinity was one of several founded after that one. And in 1985, Mother Christiane brought 6 nuns from Europe to newly acquired property in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. However, it became too difficult for them to establish a full-size monastery there, so by 1987, the search was on to find something more suitable. The sisters write about this in a newsletter from October of 1995 saying, quote, "Months and years went by, and still we had not found what we needed. In the spring of 1989, the visit of a friend from Spokane directed our attention to the Northwest. In July of 1989, we finally found what we needed, a piece of land outside of Spokane. Now my father was that friend that they wrote about in the newsletter. It turns out that as a boy, my father used to deliver laundry to the mansion that would be their future extern quarters. He grew up, spent his childhood in Phoenixville itself. And so because of that, when his father passed away in 1987, he decided to make his first visit to the Carmelites. And he maintained contact with them over the years until that visit in person again in 1989, where he has them come. Sister Maria McTildy writes, quote, "Mr. O'Neill visited our Carmel in Phoenixville, and upon learning we could not remain there, invited us to come and stay at his house so that he could show us properties in the area. 2 of us did just that. Not having found anything suitable, the day before our stay ended, Mr. Malloy came home from vacation, and he and his wife, with the approval of their children, gave us their former wheat farm for our Carmel. It's 20 acres. Now, the next picture is from, is from October 1st of 1989, and Sister writes, quote, "It is so touching to see here at our Carmel's very beginning in Spokane the 2 women who for decades to come would very generously dedicate themselves as little mothers, Mrs. Jewel Malloy and Mrs. Jan Karstetter. They have so charitably and cheerfully given of their time to serve us among their many other parish activities for our household needs, doctor's appointments, errands, etc., etc." End quote. The site was blessed on November 1st, 1989, with Father Rizzo and Father Hunter officiating, and you can just see in everybody's faces how happy they are, that the fruit of their connections, their generosity is paying off, and the construction's about to begin. Now, before I show the actual construction pictures, I thought this was an interesting visual, even though the sister said, oh, you don't need to show that. So my parents had a lot of back and forth correspondence with these nuns when they returned to Phoenixville. And my dad and Leonard had gotten the ball rolling for building permits and construction and all of that. But of course, it's not every day that a new Carmelite monastery is built. And so the sisters had to sketch out the unique layout so that everything would be built very specific to the plans that you see here. Each nun has her designated cell. And again, this was way before the internet and still before fax machines. So they would just mail instructions for things like this. Phase 1 construction in 1990 was limited to the first wing of the Carmel. Marty Brooks was the general contractor for, the whole thing was a large project, but the nuns were so grateful to have his expertise. And of course, he helped build the academy school, the original school, and they were very active for many years in the parish. And it's sad they moved away, I think, to Kentucky. Anyway, the picture on the upper right shows in the foreground where the future chapel will be. In the next picture, this is definitely one of my favorites of Leonard and Jewel. The nuns write, quote, "Our dear founders watched over every detail with parental love. The temporary chapel could only seat 12 faithful. There was a doorway to the left of St. Therese, which had a temporary grate, which behind there was the sisters' choir, which would be their future kitchen." The next one, it shows us some fun for moving day. Now, I really like this picture, not just because my dad's in it, but it's one of the few that show my dad and Mr. Malloy working. Like, it's not a just for fun, we're posing picture. We are actually doing something. They would work together a lot, but this one actually captured them in action. So I think it's the only one of the two of them in action. Anyway, say they just happy to help out, and Leonard's face is just great. He's just so happy. The nuns write about this picture, quote, "These two good friends were God's instruments in the establishment of our Carmel in Spokane," end quote. The first Mass at the Carmel was on July 11th, 1990. And on October 5th, 1990, Father Rizzo and Father Angeli blessed and laid the new cornerstone. You can see the nuns in the top right photo, not necessarily very good, but they had to get special permission to come outside to join the ceremony. And now in phase 2 of construction, you see the chapel is starting to take shape and come along very nicely. Now, the story behind the rose window, and I learned a lot from putting this together. I didn't know this information. So this is really interesting, and you see this when you're up in the choir loft, or maybe when you're at the front of the chapel and you look back. But the nuns had showcased they're very proud of their new chapel, and they probably still put out these newsletters, I'm not entirely sure, but they used to put their newsletters out showcasing this, and they talked about the window in one of the newsletters. Well, and they would always send them to benefactors and people who were interested in their order, and one of the gentlemen who they sent this to was the man who re-gilded the chalice that they had used for the Pontifical High Mass after the altar was consecrated. And they got a wonderful letter back from the gentleman saying that it was actually his family that had transported that window from Germany to St. Louis, get this, in the 1800s. And they had put it in a church that they built, but unfortunately had recently burned down in recent years. The window had been salvaged and made its way to an antique shop, where none other than Mr. Brooks stops by at this antique shop on his way to ordinations in Winona. So, of course, he scooped up the window. He didn't know the history behind it. So, anyway, again, an amazing story, but there's no coincidences with God. In May of '91, Mr. Vic Roman Sr. cut cedar wood, made shingles for both the guest house and shed, and installed them as his gift. The next picture shows Mr. Malloy's Idaho Veneer Company, how they supplied the lumber it was took a lot of lumber to build the tall enclosure wall. I think it's 10 feet high or something, maybe more than that, 12. And Marty Brooks, it's back one, sorry. Marty Brooks, Tony DiPolito, and Ed DeTuri had to do all the sweat labor for that wall, which we can see now in the next photo. It took a lot of wood, and it's really, really long. It encloses all 4 sides of the property. Now, in phase 3, the refectory has been completed. Now that it had been completed in October of 1991, the nuns are officially cloistered. And the picture, you can't necessarily see it very well, but the bottom right, it shows a couple of the Dominicans who were there, but the rest of the nuns you see with the black veil over their face. And of course, that's they always veil themselves, like if you had to come in and fix something or bring them supplies or whatnot, they prevent you from seeing their face. In 1999, I don't think Mr. Henry came, but Mrs. Henry's here. There you are. So Mr. Henry did the wrought iron cross and the wrought iron gate for the extern quarters there. And there's another interesting thing now with the window here. So the rose window that they put in the extern quarters came from the old Immaculate Conception Church. So, which before that, of course, it was the original window in the 1926 St. George's Church, the one that my father had bought at the auction. So now when you walk past there, you can lovingly think of our old church on the one side. The next one, the bell tower. Dennis Shea fabricated the bells that hang in the bell tower, and Jack Barb was the trusty structural engineer helping to achieve that efficient flow of sound. Good job. Mr. Joe McCurvey, he tiled the chapel and sacristy. They started, the second or the other phase of renovations in 1999, and there was an extensive amount, and it just really changed the chapel to be very beautiful. And Joe McCurvey tiled all that in the chapel and the sacristy, but also in the rooms in the extern quarters. And he served Mass there for many, many years. Mark Eberlein, yeah, he's still here. He programmed Mr. Stromberg's choir stall design into his wood-cutting computer to quickly fabricate them. The nuns found that very interesting, that whole process. And Mr. Frank de Artola made the wall brackets for the lights that hang behind the stalls. Sister had a lot to say about Jake. And she writes, quote, "When Mr. Jake Eberlein was just a young man, we had occasion to rejoice at the sight of father and son working side by side. The big mahogany arches over the altar and the choir grate on both sides were constructed by Jake under the instructions and genius of his father, Mark. Jake told us, quote, 'I made them, but I just did what I was told to do,' end quote. Now, because of that, we all have had the opportunity of admiring the fruits of obedience," end quote. The next one shows, this was a big change when they added a choir loft back there, because sometimes it could get really packed in there, which is a good problem to have. But the choir loft design, all of that, the structural engineer was Mr. Jerry Navarra. And so his wife had recently passed away, sadly, but they write about Susan. Quote, "Susan has always been very special to us, as she was a temporary member of our Carmel when we were in Pennsylvania. Not long after their marriage, they moved their young family to Spokane to be near the Carmel. Susan told her 2 sons, Nathan and Alex, to take good care of the Carmelites. They have faithfully fulfilled their mother's instructions as our dependable altar servers, construction workers, handymen, and tireless gardeners." And the next one is Frank de Artola and the wrought iron communion rail, which is beautiful and amazing. He also did the choir loft rail, the ladder going up to the bell tower, and the choir grate. And in the next one, Mr. Stromberg, he did a lot there. He did all the woodwork for the renovation of their chapel on the inside, and the nuns' choir, and then the woodwork within the main chapel itself. And his daughter, Dr. Stromberg, carved the altar candlesticks and Stations of the Cross. I think that's in the next one. Yeah, right there. Those are on the inside of their little the nuns' chapel. Very talented. Bill Strybeck did the finishing work for the sacristy, and this shows the tile that Joe McCurry had put in there. The altar was consecrated to the Holy Trinity, and the chapel was blessed in honor of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Mr. Jerry Mitchell did this amazing carving of the seal of Carmel onto the chapel entrance doors. Mr. Carl Stromberg also carved the mahogany candlesticks for the altar. This is a sweet page. On this page, Sister wanted to include this lovely photo of Leonard and Jewel Malloy, and I'm not sure if it made the display board in the back. They gave me a big binder, and I said I would definitely replicate the binder so that our parish would have it, and it's a project I'll continue to work on. But she says, Sister calls the picture at the top, Little Carmel on the Prairie, and writes, quote, "They gave their little prairie to God and Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Please pray for their souls." And that's Mrs. Malloy's mother there on the far right, and her name was Mrs. Julia McGregor, and she was very generous with the nuns in their time and help. Now, I was directed to give honorable mention to 3 select people and their families. And I told Sister, wow, that sounds really special. What's it take to get on that list? And she said, 10 years or more of service. I'm like, wow. And then I see the list and I start reading. I'm like, well, 2 of the people surpassed the criteria by 2 decades. She writes, quote, "The following 3 families have served our Carmel with extraordinary fidelity. The Michael Henry family has brought us fresh eggs and milk weekly from their farm for more than 3 decades. Thank you." And there's 20 nuns there now, so that's a lot of food they need to eat, you know. The Lee Szyzeski family has put in sprinkler systems, made cement borders, taken care of seedlings, along with the upkeep and weekly mowing of our front lawns for more than 3 decades. In winter, Mr. Szyzeski plows Wilbur Road and our parking lot to ensure entry at daily mass, in case you always wondered, who does that? It's all done. It's Lee. Mr. Donald Roman, besides serving us as our daily sacristan for many years, has given days and even weeks of time mowing and weed eating our property, as well as fixing equipment whenever his work allowed. Thank you for all your dedicated work, end quote, they said. That's impressive. The next picture shows basically that the ideal of Carmel, it's a life of prayer and union with God. They pray often, and they're so good, by the way, about praying for intentions that you might have. Call them up, leave a voicemail, send something in the mail. That's what they're there to do, you know. They have a life of solitude in order to be with God alone. The strict enclosure, the grates and veils separate the Carmelite sister from the outside world. They have no common workroom. Each sister works alone in her cell or in the workroom allotted to her. Silence is practiced often, and in order to stay recollected with God. They are detached from the world and its possessions by taking vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. They practice mortification by living simple and austere with simple buildings without decorations, bare white walls inside the cloister, and they wear coarse habits. They always abstain from meat. The Carmelite must endure cold in the winter and heat in the summer. And by the way, you'll never hear them make any public requests for anything they ever need, except maybe canning jars. You know, they have to eat, and they have a large garden area. And they're very humble. And if you do press them, you might get an answer like I did one time. You know, you go and you want to do something, right? We appreciate our nuns. We have to take care of them. And so when you go in, and if you've never been there, you go in and you talk at what's called a turn, and it's like a circular wooden cabinet, and you just hear a voice on the other side, but you can put things in it, and they'll pass a note back and forth. And so my sister was there, so we said, "Sister, what do you need? Is there anything we can get?" Oh, nothing. Oh, come on. There's got to be something that you need. Is there anything that you need, please? Oh, no. I said, "Sister, can't you think of something? Anything?" And then the nun at the turn said, "Well, We could use some more pillows and blankets. Humble, like I said. And of course, you don't bring them plush, fleece, because they want to sacrifice. It's basic. So I thought that was very touching. In 1989, there were only 6 nuns that were here. Now, 32 years later, they have an impressive 20 nuns. This is the strictest of all the religious orders, so it can be difficult for some people. In that October 1995 newsletter that I had mentioned to you, they also wrote, quote, "There are not many contemplative vocations in the modern world, and this lack of vocations is probably our greatest trial. We hope that vocations will come from the SSPX schools and St. Dominic's School," end quote. In fact, we do have 2 young ladies from our parish who are in the Carmel. That's great, and hopefully that will continue. Now, there is one extern sister that you will notice in the main chapel when you attend Mass there, and that's Sister Mary Joseph. She is like a guardian angel for the Carmel, helps with a variety of necessary tasks that need to be completed, that they just need that helper. And then she's also able to have somebody take her to go out and go shopping and so forth. Very sadly, they did have their first death within the Carmel in 2020. Sister Marie of the Immaculate Heart passed away from cancer, and Sister Maria McTilde said, quote, "She showed us how to die," end quote. The Archbishop wrote a letter to my parents that I had talked about at the round table in August of 1989 saying, quote, "My sister, Mother Mary Christiane, and the Carmelites of Phoenixville are very happy and grateful for your kindness and your help in the Carmel's Foundation near Post Falls. I cannot forget your kind hospitality, and I am sure that the Carmel shall be for you and all the people of Post Falls a spring of many blessings," end quote. For the occasion of my father's 90th birthday in 2020, the nun sent a touching note to my father that he deeply appreciated, and he displayed it all at his party to all of us, which said in part, quote, "We think Our Lady had her eye on you from before your birth for this good work. We are grateful for your visit to our Carmel in Phoenixville over 30 years ago to invite us to, quote unquote, come and see Spokane Valley. We are grateful for your fine welcome and for assisting us by driving us from site to site, but especially for introducing us to the Malloys, whom we only knew by letter until then," end quote. The nuns say to all of us, they put this together, this is beautiful, quote, "To all of our dear clergy and parishioners, we thank you wholeheartedly for all of your services throughout the past 32 years we've been in Spokane. We have limited our scrapbook to our beginnings here in the construction of our monastery because we would otherwise have to name all of you. Thank you especially for the masses and prayers offered on our behalf. We continue to pray for you and in gratitude offer for you and your intentions Holy Mass, Holy Communion, Divine Office, Litany of the Sacred Heart, Novena of the Immaculate Conception, Holy Rosary, 50 Magnificats, Te Deum, Joyous Jubilee, the Carmelites," end quote. Now, take note of their address on the bottom right of this slide and send them a little of your money with a donation in honor of the Malloy and O'Neill families and in thanksgiving for having the wonderful Carmelite monastery that they have so close to us. Thank you.
Find themselves